Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Yellarigu Namaskara. I'm Santosh. I heartily welcome all the viewers who have joined from India and other parts of the world to 112th MFI Web Talk. I'm really glad to announce this statistics with all the viewers that this workshop has got a tremendous response from all the viewers. About 7,000 plus views that we have got through YouTube Live, YouTube recording, and also Facebook Live, and from more than 10 countries. And we are really happy that for showing such a warm response from all the viewers, and very really heartfelt for this response from all the viewers. As you know, we converse with modern sadhakas about Indian philosophy, culture, wellness, and how we can use Madhya Shastras to enrich our lives. I request all of you to just stay away from any distraction for the next 30 to 40 minutes. This topic is the most intriguing one: science and spirituality. We've heard many scientists and spiritual leaders talking about these approaches, but yet the debate has just kept going. Science on one side believes that it's what it sees. It requires facts, it requires lab tests. On the other hand, our sages have decoded certain cryptic topics as Vedic laws, which stands as tall order of knowledge. Don't we keep hearing that Indian sages were far ahead in terms of their understanding and knowledge, while the civilization on other parts of the world had just started to begin? So let's deep dive into these two approaches, how they converge, and if yes, in what ways they converge, and what are the timings. So for this, I'll invite Sunder, who is the guest for the day. And before I do so, I'll just set the context. So we'll be talking about the commonalities between science and spirituality, what is a divide, and the integrating between science and spirituality will be discussed. Hi Sundar, welcome to the 112th MFI workshop, and I'll be really glad to hear some interesting insights from you about science and spirituality. So before we discuss, I would request you to just take us through the workshop's core philosophy and the 9 God's truths about this God's creation, just to recap to our audience. Over to you, Sundar.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Hari Om. Namaskara to all of you, and a hearty welcome to a very interesting topic, something which has intrigued not just us in India, but practically every human being around the world. We honestly hope that all of you are doing well and safe in the pandemic around us, and looking to spend some time understanding the difference between science and spirituality. Is there a difference at all? And how do we sort of look at these two topics, which appear to be very divergent? So with that, if you could bring up the framework that we have for the workshop was living with confidence. So in the 100th workshop that we did, this is the 112th, we talked about living with confidence. And we said that how do you live with confidence? By knowing, living, and thriving. So 5 mindsets that we have to develop and 5 habits that we have to inculcate to live with confidence. So we talk about this framework again and again, mainly to ensure that all of us have absorbed it and understood it and internalized it. So with that, living with confidence, we moved on a few workshops. Then we came to a very core topic in the 107th workshop, which was about the 9 truths of God's creation. The famous shloka by Sri Vyasaraja that you see on your screen is Shriman Madhvamate Hari Parataraha Satyam Jagat Tatvado Bhinnaha Jivagana Hareranucharaha Ichocha Bhavangataha Muktihi Naida Sukhanubhutihi Amala Bhaktischa Tat Sadhanam Shakshadri Kritayam Pramanam Akhilam Nayika Vedyo Harihi. in 9 basic tenets. Srivasaraja summarized the essence of Madhva philosophy. Now, those of you who have missed it, please go and watch the YouTube recording of the 107th workshop, which is titled Nine Truths of God's Creation, and where we have explained this in some detail. Right? So, with that, we will deep dive into today's topic, which is science and spirituality. So, that's the background with which we would like to start the workshop.
I would request you to define what is science, what does it stand for, what is the definition, and what is the definition of spirituality? Because that is very important for all of the audience to understand the core, and then we move ahead.
Absolutely. So, if you just look at the way we had defined science, if you had in one of our earlier workshops, we had looked at the definition of science. So, Santosh, if you could just bring up that slide, which talks about what is science, and here we would like to say that science, as we define it in the modern way, so it is the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experimentation. So this is a slightly technical definition. So let me spend 2 minutes explaining what it means. This is the most commonly accepted definition of what we know as modern science. It is an intellectual and a practical activity, which is very pragmatic. It is something that you should be able to think through. It's practical. That means something that you observe in your day-to-day life. It is a systematic study. That means there is a method in which a particular topic is to be studied, of the structure and behavior. What is the structure of this world? What is the structure of a physical being, which could be studied through chemistry or medicine or so many other areas of science, and behavior. How, because of this structure, how does the physical and the natural world through observation and experiment? The focus, therefore, is on a certain logic which you observe and an experiment, something that you are able to do to prove a certain paradigm or to disprove a certain paradigm. That is what is the definition of science as we know it. Now, again, science does not need too much of explanation because, fortunately or otherwise, all of us have studied science in our basic education, sometime or the other. Some people could have studied more, some people could have studied less, but it is a mandatory subject as a topic, and so we are all brought up, in our earlier part of our education, by studying science in that format. If you go to the next slide, Santosh, it is a definition of spirituality, right? And we had defined the spirituality in our last workshop, where we say it is a state of mind, where Sri Hari is supreme and we are his devotees. It is a very simple definition. Obviously, when we talk about spirituality, there can be multiple definitions available. Similarly, there can be multiple definitions of science, but this is the definition that we have decided to adopt, and which talks about the core tenet of Mantra Shastra, which is Sri Hari being supreme and we are his devotees. So the other way to look at spirituality is that it is a superset, as we know, as we studied in mathematics and set theory, that there is a physical world, the world around us, which is got physical objects, physical things, nature, etc. It has got a certain emotional part of it, which is our relationship with that. There is a mental construct. We all have something in our mind, and of course, something that is there eternally, something that goes beyond the physical world. All this is a part of spirituality, right? So by just defining what is science and spirituality, we are all very clear that there is a difference in the way science works and there's a difference in the way spirituality works. So there are definite differences between the two. One core difference which you can see right here by the definition is the science deals with the physical part of the world. It deals with the objects, it deals with what they can see, it talks about things. Whereas spirituality talks about the physical thing and talks about a lot of aspects beyond what is that spiritual aspect. Anybody who does not believe in God, we tell they are Nastikas. Nastika means Nastika, means someone who is Nasti, who believes in Nasti. What is Nasti? Na Asti is Nasti. Na Asti means what? A person who says that I will believe only in the thing that I can see. I will not believe in things which I cannot see or I cannot perceive. If something is beyond my perception, it does not exist. So when we talk about God, we talk about soul, we talk about death and life. Lot of these things I cannot see. So therefore, I do not believe in those things. That person is called Nastika. Generally, we use it in a slightly negative tone when we're talking about it, but at the fundamental level, that's all it means. So this is the definition of science, and this is the definition of spirituality, Santosh, the way we look at it.
Thanks, Sunder. Now the definition is set. The only thing is that there is always oppositions. Like, there is so much of science that we are seeing, modern science, and also spirituality is also has I don't say really grown, but it has its own place. But we always sort of either converge or diverge. So like people oppose, like saying that, oh, this doesn't work because it has no science in it, uh, so on and so forth. So like, how do we sort of like take a midpoint where both sort of converge? Like, can we look at it that way? So can you just like sort of
Absolutely.
elaborate on that? Yeah.
Absolutely, Santosh. I think you bring up a very valid point, and that's the crux of this workshop. That's why we are probably having this workshop, right? In my educational career and my professional career, I've had the opportunity to study science as a formal subject. So when I say formal, I went to a school, I went to a college, and I studied science, I studied engineering, and I did my MBA. And in every place, it was obviously studying of science of one form or the other. So that is one part of education that I have, and I'm sure many people would have got a very formal set of education in the topic of science. And more recently, 30 years back, when I started my study of Madhya Shastra under our illustrious Guru Sri Vyasadikari Prabhanjanacharya, I started listening to his upanyasas and reading his books. And slowly, over the next few years, it started to dawn on me that actually we are not talking about two different things when we are talking about science and spirituality. If there is anything that I would like to convey to the participants, is saying that, is it something which is different? Is science and spirituality different? To me, I don't think so at all. And when I was contemplating on what are the things that are common and where do these areas converge, there are far more areas of convergences than divergences. And divergences seem to be created mainly because of our limited understanding of Shastras or spirituality. I think that is a big challenge because most of us have not studied Shastras in a formal way, whereas most of us have studied science in a very formal way, and we are given to believe that science is therefore more scientific than Shastra. But actually, there are a lot of areas of convergence. So let's start looking at the areas of convergence, Santosh. If you could bring up that slide. So if you look at it, whether it is a scientist or a great philosopher or a spiritualist, everybody talks about being a seeker of truth. They are always trying to find out what is the truth behind a certain phenomenon, right? So when you look at a great scientist like Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein or Charles or Boyle, these laws are something that we are all grown up with. When you look at these people and what they did was that they had a certain question in their mind. They had a certain hypothesis in their mind. And they worked on that hypothesis, probably some of them throughout their life, to ultimately end up with a certain discovery or certain invention, right? So the idea of Isaac Newton was not to formulate laws of what we know as Newton's laws. That was not his idea. His idea was to look at certain phenomena which are happening around him and say, why does this happen like this? So they were all seeking the truth. They were all chasing the truth all their lives. Similarly, when you look at our great gurus, be it Madhvacharya or Sri Jaitirtharu or Vyasarajaru or Raghavendra Swamigalu or any of these great gurus, Vadaraja Tirtharu, Ragottama Tirtharu, and so on, what we see is that they're constantly seeking the truth, right? One of the most important texts called Brahma Sutras, that is something that we will see in greater detail in the coming workshops. Brahma Sutra is a very important part. How does the Brahma Sutras start? It starts with Athato Brahma Jignasa Om. Om Athato Brahma Jignasa Om. Meaning, you have to seek what is Brahman or what is God and what is that ultimate truth. So everything starts with a seeker of truth. Whether it is a scientist or a philosopher or a spiritualist, they are all seeking truth. That's the first thing to be remembered. Second thing is they're all inquiring into something. They're saying, why? Why does this happen? Why does this behave like this? When you throw an object on top, up, why does it have to come back? Why doesn't it just fly away? Right? Or it could be a spiritual inquiry. He's again asking the same question: why does this happen? Why does God be? Why do we behave like this? What is the relationship between me and God? Is there God at all? Why should I believe in God? Why should we accept the entity of God? And why should we accept the entity of God in that manner? So every time there's an inquiry which is going on. If you read some of our Shastra Granthas, not some, all Granthas, they start with a question. They start with a debate. There's an intrigue amongst the people who are participating in that Grantha about what is the truth. So if you look at Bhagavad Gita, the famous, clearly one of the most famous philosophical works in the world, it starts with a question and a series of questions. You look at the Upanishads, everything starts with a question. Somebody is asking questions, somebody is answering it. Bhagavata is a question and answer session. Mahabharata is in the form of question and answer. Any type, anything that you are looking at starts with a question, and then it starts, the whole text is about clearing that question. Similarly, is the hypothesis in the mind of the people, right? So that's the second part. The third part is about analysis and logic, right? So in both science and spiritual, there is a certain analysis and there is a logic, right? In Shastra, it is called Tarka Shastra, which is explanation of logic, explanation of what happens one after the other. Why does it happen in a certain way? And so on. In both the methods, there is something called the system of epistemology, which is called in Madhya Shastra, it's called Pramana Paddhati, where Sri Jaitirtharu defines what will be accepted as proof. So when let us say there is a debate, there have to be some ground rule for the debate. Otherwise, you will not be able to judge who is right and who is wrong. Every debate there is. If there is a debate in the parliament, there are rules. If there is a debate on a scientific topic, there are rules. There is a framework which one has to agree to before the discussion starts. So Madhya Shastra probably is one of the most unique forms of spirituality, where that Pramana Paddhati defines what is acceptable as proof or not. Now one can have a dispute on that itself and debate, which of course our Shastras are always open to. But once they have agreed, the rules, the ground rules are set. So imagine a football match, right? How does the match start? It is between two teams. The first thing is the goal post has to be decided. You can't keep moving the goal post. Let us say you suddenly decide to change the size of the goal post. One goal post is big, the other one is very, very small. The people with a big goal post have a distinct disadvantage. Will they agree to it? No. Similarly, both these fields have their own definition of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. The Madhya Shastra is very clear in accepting three things, which is Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Agama. Pratyaksha means what our senses can perceive. What can we see and perceive? That is the best proof, no doubt. But again, there are a lot of things in this world, there are a lot of phenomena which our eyes cannot see. Correct? So when you say, for example, there is air in this room, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting alive here. There is air in this room, but I cannot see it. but I can feel it. Right? So there are a lot of things which cannot be seen, but which can be inferred. We can look at something and then infer something else. This is also used in the form of science. Not everything that we talk about in science is something that we see. For example, look at, let us say you're a student of 10th standard and you're studying science. There are so many theories which are mentioned in your textbooks. Some of them are something that are explained in a laboratory. But is everything that is taught to you, do we explain that in a laboratory? The answer is no. Right? So therefore, some of these things are understood by inference. But since it is understood by inference, and the fact that some of that is validated by actual proof, which is pratyaksha, you are able to accept it. And that category is called anumana. Anumana means by inference. Anumana does not mean doubt. We use the word anumana in many languages as doubt. It's not doubt. Anumana means by inference. The third piece, which is accepted as proof, is agama. Now, agama means by what is written in the texts that precede us. That means the text, scriptures, which are there for time immemorial. Those are called agamas. Those are also accepted as proof, whereas science does not accept that as proof, which is fine. And we'll come to that point later. But look at agama. Let's have a color on agama. Agama is something which has come from past. So something that has been decided, something that has been dissected and accepted in the past with proof. Again, it is not in isolation. With proof, it has been sort of established that there is a fact. That is called agama. Now, this system exists in the judicial system. If you see the judicial system in India, there is something called judicial precedence. That means if you can take an earlier judgment of a Supreme Court or High Court or any court, you can use that as a proof to say that the last time a similar situation came, the court gave a judgment in this manner. So therefore, the same judgment applies in this case also. So that can be proved as, proof. So that is equivalent of what we call as agama. Okay. So again, coming back to this, you will see that there are a lot of similarities in the manner in which science and spiritualities actually work. The other area where they converge a lot is that there is governance laws of the nature. Both of them believe that there are some laws which govern the nature. The nature around us does not act in a random way. And we are always trying to establish those laws in our mind. Right? So for example, you look at a botanist. Every botanist will agree that if you plant a seed of mango, you will get a mango tree. Right? At an oversimplified manner, if you want to look at it. But there is a law of nature. There is a law of nature which is then captured into formulas and laws that we all study. So that is what is called laws of nature. So we all accept that there are certain universal laws which are there. Whether we like it, we accept it or not, there are those laws. Science also accepts it. In fact, majority of science is spent on understanding these laws, formulating it and testing it under all circumstances. The same structure is used by Shastras also. Shastras are nothing but the governing laws of our nature. We saw that in great detail in our 107th workshop, which talked about the 9 laws which sort of explain the nature of God's creation. Right? And lastly, very importantly, science and spirituality, both of them agree that there is a universal source of energy. There is one all-powerful universal source of energy, right? So whenever science talks about different types of energy, yes, there are different forms of energy that we can see, but ultimately there is one source of that energy, which then manifests in several ways. Anuvyakhana of Srimad Ananda Tirtharu clearly mentions this in a beautiful shloka, which says that there ekameva mahashakti kurute sarva manjasa. That means there's only one form of energy which manifests in different ways. So if you look at a house, There is only one wire, electric wire, which comes inside the house from the electric pole. But the moment it comes inside the house, it manifests itself in every way. When it enters a tube light, it gives light. When it gets into a water heater, it heats water. When enters a fridge, it cools things. When it goes into a pump, it pulls up the water. When it goes into a mixie or a grinder, it grinds things. And when it's on a television, it shows us a picture, and so on. There are many, of course, many other uses. Not to mention, most important use of electricity today is to charge your mobile phones, right? So all these things manifest in different ways, but there is an acceptance that there is one source of energy which then sort of spreads into infinite sources of energy. So that is the the areas of convergence. Now, having said that, there are differences as well. Back to you, Santosh.
Sundar, can I say that in a way, Madhvacharya and all the gurus are also spiritual scientists? Can we quote them as so? Because they also knew the science behind all the rituals and what they did. So can we also call them like the great scientists, the spiritual scientists?
Absolutely. See, the Shastras use a word called Vijnana. What we today call as Vijnana has been used long back. That's not a new word. That did not come now. It is a part of. I mean, those who recite Vishnu Sahasranamam every day, they will know this. Vijnana Shastram etat sarvam janardanat. So Vijnana means Vijnana, Vishesha Gnana. That means any knowledge which requires a detailed study, and at the end of it has a great understanding waiting for you at the end of that, is called Vijnana. Vishesha
Okay.
Gnana. V means
Okay.
Vishesha Gnana. V also means Vishnu Gnana. So understanding of what is really special in your life is called Vijnana. And the topic of science, the science, the modern science we know it, we call that also Vijnana. So if you see, there is a huge amount of convergence. And the day we understand the convergence of science and spirituality, in my mind, will be the happiest moment for our lives. Because all along, what we have been thinking is science is in some way superior, and spiritual world
Spirituality, yeah.
always is at the defensive. They have to explain why they are right and so on, largely because of our incomplete understanding of both these subjects. At least science, as I said earlier, has been understood, has is prevalent all around us. So that's why anything that's right, we have a tendency to say, oh, this is very scientific. We never say, oh, this is
Exactly.
very spiritual, right? So that's a
Exactly.
difference in our own perception about what is the huge area of convergence with that.
Correct. And also, I hear a lot Sundar saying that a lot of spiritual activities or experience don't come under the lab tests, unlike scientific observations. How do we like how should like one look at this, because it doesn't come under the lab test, doesn't probably have some proofs. So how do we sort of understand that?
Yes. So we have to understand that not everything in the realm of modern science is also something that we see. There are lots of things that are happening that we don't see or we don't perceive it, right? Like right when you and I are speaking, I am at my home, and hopefully you are also in the safe realm of your homes, all of you. Millions and probably billions of waves are passing over our head in so many different ways. Millions of phone calls are being made. There are waves that are there. There are heat waves. There are as I said, billions of different types of waves. So many televisions are switched on. There are so many receivers which are there. Every mobile phone today is effectively a satellite, right? And which is catching so many waves. But said that when you look at that situation, what happens is that everything cannot be proven in a state of in a laboratory alone, even in the uh, area of science. It is proven because of a certain assumption that we make, and those assumptions are tested again and again to prove that yes, this must be the case. Let me give you an example. All of us have not gone to the moon, but when if I ask you, has the man gone to the moon? All of us will agree that it has. Why? because we believe in the people who have told us that they have gone to the moon. This is what it was filmed there, and they have come back. We have no reason to disbelieve them, right? The same concept exists in the topic of Shastra also. It is called Aptavakya. Aptavakya means something that has been told by someone who is very close to you. Apta. But that's a common word. But apta in this context means not someone who is close to you or someone who is sweet to you. Apta in this context means someone whom you have tested. And you're very, very sure after repeated interactions with that person, after repeated debate with that person, you have come to the conclusion that whatever he is saying is right. So
Correct.
yes, exists between. So that is how our topic. And there would be areas which cannot be explained or cannot be demonstrated in the lab, but those are true. Mathematics, the perfect science, as it's called, has got axioms. Piano's axioms. We all heard about Piano's axiom. There are more than 50 such axioms which have not been proven, but which are true. We see it. It says, look at a natural number, add 1 to it, you will get another natural number. Can anyone prove this? Nobody has been able to prove this, but we know by our experience saying that okay, there's so many natural numbers, you add 1 to it, you will get another natural number because that's how natural number is defined.
Cool. Let's move on to divergence, Sundar.
Yes. Yeah, so before that, if I may take one question, Mr. Sripati says, Sri Madhvacharya also called Shushka Tarkam Nag Kav Rajit, Varjayit. Yes, which means discard diagram. Absolutely. This is again something which is very true. I think thanks, Mr. Sripati, for bringing it up. So when we talk about logic in this context, it means it has to have a certain flow. There has to be a reason and there has to be an inference, right? But again, Madhvacharya cautions us against overuse of this logic because there are a lot of things which do not fit into the logic. Logic is not the final decider in anything. It has to be something which has to be tested every time. So let me give an example which Shivadara just gives. It's a beautiful logic which actually completely agrees with what Mr. Sripati is saying. He says, look at a mango seed, right? You've seen the size of a mango seed. Look at the size of a mango, right? It's bigger than that. So there's a mango and there's a seed inside that. If you take the logic that look at the seed, look at the fruit, and look at the mango tree. The tree is so big, and the mango is this big, and the seed is this big. By that logic, let's look at a pumpkin. The pumpkin fruit is so big. So how big must be the tree? By that logic, if you go purely by logic, the fact is the tree is not even a tree. It is a creeper, and it is so small. And you sometimes wonder how can it lift the weight of a pumpkin. So he cautions you that logic, tarka, has got its own limitations. And that is why in all our Shastra Granthas, blind tarka, blind logic, which is just mathematical and mechanical, is not discouraged. So, Mr. Sripati, you're right about that. So, we'll go to the areas of divergence and then we'll take question and answers. So, why did these two areas of science and spirituality, why did they diverge? They diverged because of one phenomena, which we all know as Renaissance period. So, between the 13th and the 17th century, 4 centuries, Europe as a continent saw the birth of several areas. What we call as modern science was probably born during that period almost in its entirety. Lot of new discoveries, lot of new inventions, some great scientists were born in that period, some great artists, some great musicians. So it is a conglomeration of so many different areas coming together and creating what we today call as modern science. When that was happening, the Eastern world, which is to a large extent India and China, and also some parts of Greece, though it's not East, Greek, the Greek philosophy was amongst the most developed. These were the 3 areas which are highly developed in terms of spiritual spirituality, those three countries and those three regions were under a lot of wars and lot of strife, which meant that they did not participate in that Renaissance period in that time in that manner. So that's one of the areas of divergence just from a timing perspective. But more fundamentally, the proof by experimentation. This is a topic that we have already discussed, that we experiment and we accept it. In that experiment, everything has to be shown as far as science is concerned. Whereas our Shastras talk about something called experience, saying experience is something that you have to feel. If you do not feel and you're not convinced, then it is it cannot be accepted as a proof, right? So perception by senses, which is what science talks about, if my senses can expect it, versus the experience that I have. So there are certain things, there are a lot of phenomena which our experiences have to look at it and then say, okay, yes, I experienced this, I looked at it, and I felt yes, that is true. So when you are reading the Shastra Granthas, it is very, very important to sit in contemplation and question that and say, are you in agreement with that? Are you experiencing it? Or are you experiencing something the reverse? The other area of discrepancy is between the understanding of God, soul, mind, and dependence. Science, while it accepts that there is one universal source of energy, they are not in agreement with the fact that there is something by name God. They do not believe, not all scientists believe, some of them do, but some of them clearly don't, saying that God is a sentient being. That means somebody who's there and who is a living person. It's a living organism of sorts. And he is the person who is guiding it, is not accepted by science. Science also does not accept the concept of soul in the manner spiritual world accepts it. So what is the question? What is soul? Is it the heart or the brain? It is something in between, and that is where the science does not accept soul, mind, and of course the dependence of all of us, the human being, and all the of the entire nature on that supreme God, because there is no question about the God, so there is no question about dependence on anybody called God. There are a lot of other areas of discrepancies between the divergence between the two, but these are four fundamental areas where science and spirituality are not in agreement. Last thing is life after death, saying that what is life and what is death? And what do we say? What do we really mean when we say somebody is dead? Somebody is alive 1 minute, next minute we say that person is dead. So what is the difference between the two? What happens in the phenomena of death? This is beautifully explained in our Shastras, the Garuda Purana, Bhagavata, and many other granthas. But that is not explained in the topic of science. There is a lot of experimentation which is going on in different medical centers across the world, where they're trying to understand what really happens when a man dies. There have been a lot of hypotheses, but nothing conclusive has actually emerged in that area. So these are the areas of divergence between the two areas. Santosh.
Sundar, also, I think how should like one actually gauge, because now we've also seen convergence and divergence, but how should one approach this? Like someone who is in the spiritual practice, should he keep always looking for a scientific proofs, or how should like one should approach this?
I think, Santosh, what I have learned in my study of Shastras is one should come with an open mind. They should just keep an open mind and take in everything as a hypothesis. So even when you're reading the Shastra Granthas, there is no need to be overwhelmed by the fact that it was written by a great scholar. Yes, a great master has written it. We understand who all have contributed to this, and we have the highest regards. That's why we are probably reading those texts in the first place. But let us not get overwhelmed, because the moment the topic of overwhelmness or getting overwhelmed comes, our emotions get added to it, right? So even I mentioned the topic of aptavakya. Aptavakya does not mean you get into emotions. Aptavakya, people become apta only after you have tested who they are. So let us keep an open mind and we keep that mind of that spirit alive with you, right? So when we all know the story of Sri Trivikrama Panditacharya, one of the disciples of Madhacharya. When his father, spoke to him in the last years of his life, he told him one thing, that um, I have studied a certain form of philosophy all my life. Now I believe that there is something wrong in the way we are interpreting the nature of God. So there is something wrong. So why? I don't know what it is, but I leave it up to you. So please study the philosophy, but keep an inquiring mind, right? And Trivikrama Panditacharya continued that studies of the philosophy with a spirit of inquiry, which is so visible and it is so evident in the manner that he tackles the philosophical question. His writings are a delight because they're full of these debates that go on in our in our minds. And when he did that, when he kept an open mind, even at that advanced age, when he met Sri Madhvacharya, he was very open to that area of debate. And look at what he did. He was prepared to reverse his entire life's philosophical leanings in the after a debate. But remember, he was prepared to reverse it is one part, but he did it only after a debate with Sri Madhvacharya, which spanned 15 days. Correct?
Okay.
So that means again there is a spirit of inquiry, an openness to learn, and openness to debate. Somebody says it is a valid point, you have to accept it. So that's the framework I would seriously advise all our participants to keep, whether they are studying science or they are studying philosophy.
So, like, I follow Madhya Shastra, so I shouldn't be under an assumption saying that it's highly scientific. So, you're trying to say that I have to do my own research, ask question, validate, and then accept.
Yes. Now, the best part of studying our spirituality, spiritual lessons, Santosh, is that the burden of asking the question is actually taken in by the teacher himself, right?
Correct.
So if you look at, if you go to a class, the teacher, teaches something in a classroom in a school, and then over a period of time, they will ask us the question. The teacher asks the student the question. Here, most of the question that we get and we are likely to get are put forward by the teachers themselves, and they clarify what is right or wrong. So it's a treat by itself, a scientific treat by itself, to study our spiritual texts, be it Jaitirtharo or be it Raghavendra Swamiji, or whether it is Vadirajaru, Vyasarajaru, and of course Madhvacharya himself, who ask a lot of questions, who put forward questions, who put forward what we call as Purva Paksha is nothing but hypothesis, saying that, okay, I'm hypothesizing this and then I'm disproving that hypothesis, which is a very scientific structure that we follow in everything, in any field for that matter.
Cool, Sundar. Sundar, I also want you to sort of take me through also about the limitations of the science. Like we'll also touch upon a couple of pointers on that.
Sure. I'll take another 3 minutes and quickly go through that because we've already spoken about it. So if you bring out the slide, Santosh, it is that, when you look at science, right, we have defined science the way it is. One of the biggest challenge with science is that it is something that deals with the physical world. So there is nothing beyond what is physical, what is seen in front of us. So the ability, therefore, it sometimes lacks the ability to answer why sequentially. So you ask, okay, tell me why does the apple fall on the ground? We say it's because of gravity. Why does gravity happen? No, but there is a magnetic power in the earth. But how can something which is uh, you know we know magnetism works only on a metal, but how come an apple which is not a metal, what kind of attraction does it have? So we do not know the answer. This cannot be answered sequentially when it comes to modern science, right? So science has got limitations. It can definitely explain a few phenomena to a certain extent, but not beyond that. Does not It does not give credence to understanding. So beyond a point, it does not give credence to past understanding of the thing. So if something is been there in the past, spirituality accepts that. If it has been proven earlier, it accepts that the example that we saw earlier. Again, when you talk about what we call as metaphysics, what is metaphysics? Beyond physics. It's beyond a subject called beyond physics. That is called metaphysics. Whereas science calls it mythology. The spirituality calls it metaphysics, whereas mythology, science itself calls it mythology. That means it's a myth. It never happened. These stories have been created. The scenarios have been created. They don't doesn't exist in reality. Lastly, the science field itself is not unanimous about defining a system of proof. So, what is one man's proof, one scientist's proof, is not something which is definitely necessarily agreed to by another scientist. Even in the case of very famous scientists like Albert Einstein, there were a lot of disputes within his own lifetime about his theories, and scientific theories are therefore evolving, right? So, looking at these as limitations of modern science, let's also look at certain highlights that we see from the Madhya Shastra. So if you look at Madhya Shastra, it is amongst the different Shastras. It is the latest Shastra. That means it is highly evolved and refined system. We have explained this in our previous workshops also. That means whatever were the debates that came up on the previous forms of philosophy, Madhva Shastra has overcome that. There is no coercion. If you study Madhva Shastra, and I would deeply urge everybody on this who are participating here to take up a formal study of Madhva Shastra. Anecdotally hearing about Madhva Shastra and Pravachanas is a very good starting point, and has to therefore be developed into studying the Madhva Shastra in a sequential, in a logical, and in a systematic way, like the way students at Vidyapita do. So please, if you have not started that already, I think we have to start studying philosophy. Only then we will understand what is the real purport of that Shastra, right? So no coercion. If you see the structure of Shastra, there is no coercion, and there is a maximum openness to debate. There are questions which are asked. Those questions are put repeatedly. They are broken down into smaller parts, asked, with questions. It's question and answer to bulldoze over all the doubts that people have. At no point the Shastra says, look, enough, don't ask too many questions, right? Even in a classroom, sometimes the teacher gets irritated and they say, hey, stop, you're asking too many questions. But Shastra Pata is the only way, which is to say that, the questions are, something that you can please ask. Start with questions. As I said before, all the philosophical texts, all the topics, they start with a question. They start with a question and they do not stop till the last question is answered. And of course, as we know, Madhya Shastra has had some of the greatest thinkers of the last, practically 8 centuries, who have come, evaluated Madhya Shastra again and again and again and again. So it has stood the test of time. They were not blind followers. It's very evident in the manner that they present that they have taken up their own, inquiry, come back to the conclusions which Madhya Shastra propagates. And it's very clear that it's their interpretation. And lastly, I think the Madhva Shastra gives that state of what is called moksha, which defines that state as a state of permanent bliss. So, anybody who follows this method of spirituality is bound to experience that state of bliss, some stage or the other. When all the doubts have moved away, the person is in state of the perfect happiness and eternal happiness, which is what we call as moksha. Who doesn't want to have that state of bliss? Is there anybody in this world who doesn't want to be happy? Who does not want to be in a state of happiness forever? Right? Yes, all of us want that. And that is Madhva Shastra takes us to that ultimate destination. So Shruti Rao has asked a very important question. Do we have any limitations in spirituality? The limitations in spirituality are largely because of our own understanding of spirituality, Shruti. And why do I say that? Because we do not have that, we have not studied spirituality in the manner that it should be studied, right? So if there's anything that is a limitation, it is in the limitation in which we have studied spirituality. We should study spirituality, we should study topics of philosophy with a very inquiring mind. Do not accept what somebody else has told you. Yes, great masters have told you, but you have to sort of munch it in your mind. I'm reminded of an anecdote which our guru had shared with us. Shri Brahmanjanacharya once had told that if a third standard student is asked, "What is 12 into 7?" the child will say, "My madam told me it is 84." Right? That's what a child will say. But if you ask somebody who's doing his MSc in mathematics, what is 12 into 7? He does not say 12 into 7 is 84 because my teacher told me. He says 12 into 7 is 84 because I know it. Right? So yes, it is Madhya Shastra. It is being told by Madhvacharya. It has been propagated by great gurus. But let us make our own inquiry and prove to ourselves that this is what we believe in, right? And so it does not becomes Madhva Shastra, it becomes my Shastra, and I believe in it, right? And I'm sure the study of the Shastras will lead us to that point. So that is the only imitation of spirituality is the huge number of, you know, sort of layers of fact that we have our own biases about spirituality which come in the way. That is one. There are so many commentaries by so many scholars. So, for a person having limited Sanskrit knowledge, what is the systematic way of studying Mantra Shastra? I think the last, this is the 112th workshop, 110th workshop, keep me honest here, Santosh, was on the topic of how do we study the Mantra Shastra, right? So it's available on the website or on our YouTube channel. There is a systematic way in which we have to study Madhya Shastra. It has been mentioned there. And if you talk to any established scholar, they will be able to guide you into how to look at it. One point, I think it has been, of course, told again and again that, what is the science, should I learn Sanskrit to be able to understand this? I would like to share with you what our guru told me once when I first went to him and asked him that I want to study Mantra Shastra in a formal way because I was listening to a lot of pravachanas, etc. But I wanted to study that in a systematic way, and therefore I need to study Sanskrit. His first suggestion to me was study. If you have a scientific temperament, that is more important for the study of Shastras than knowing Sanskrit. Of course, studying Sanskrit is a pleasure by itself. It gives a different understanding of the subject altogether because Sanskrit, unlike other languages in the world, is a technical language. There is no substitute to it. But while you are studying Sanskrit, I think keeping and preserving a state of analysis, an open mind, and a system of analysis is very, very important for study of Sanskrit. So, Mr. Narahari, I don't think you should be. I'm sorry, Mr. Sanjeev. I don't think you should be worried about that aspect. Please do look at that workshop and please do reach out to us if you want any help in terms of connecting to great teachers who can help you with that um, um, that part. Akshay brings up a very important question, Santosh. It's brilliant. Is meditation and dhyana the various practices advocated by the Shastra the spiritual equivalent of sex? Absolutely. I think he's bang on. If you look at, our, when we study the biographies of our great gurus, what kind of lifestyle did they lead? And what kind of thinking and how did they time? How did they, spend their time? How did they analyze? How did they write? It is very, very close to the way the modern day scientists were. But we always say, oh, he's an absent-minded scientist. Our gurus were also so engrossed in the pursuit of spirituality that they were not absent-minded, but definitely they spent a lot of time contemplation. So you can look at Sri Jaitirtharu in Yeragoda. We all know, he stayed in a small cave, which is even today it's so difficult to go inside that cave. Vyasaraja spent a lot of time in the Tirupati temple. If you go If you know the inside structure of the Tirupati temple, which is very different from the way we look at it or from outside, there is something, there was a Dhyana Mandira inside, from where Vyasaraja used to see the god
See
directly
that. Yeah.
and used to write his book. And the Anika Mandira is, of course, very famous. Similarly, with Raghavendra Swamiji, he chose a place like Mantralayam, which was in the middle of nowhere at that point in time. It is very clear that they, whatever they did as meditation and dhyana, would be the time that they would actually contemplate. When we say that, okay, they did meditation for hours together, what were they doing? They were meditating, they were contemplating on how, on each of these things, how, what are the interconnections between the several things that they have studied that day. And that deep insight that they gained at that time came out in the form of their granthas, which are nothing
So,
but their teaching notes that they would present to their students. If you study the Shastra Granthas, you are absolutely convinced that the Dhyana Mantapa or wherever they sat down, which was easily the farthest place from the rest of civilization. We know Tapovana of Sri Vadirajulu. All of those places were places where, which are like their scientific laboratories, if I may say.
cool. Sundar Prasad asks, like, is Madhva Dharma is spiritual or scientific?
It is spiritual because it is a topic which encompasses the physical world as well. There are clearly topics about, so when we look at the structure of Madhya Shastra, you remember we drew a triangle in one of the earlier workshop. It's talked about God, then there is soul, which is us, and there is a world. So it seeks to explain all three of them. So therefore, it is spiritual, and the physical part is a subset of that.
Okay. So Jagannath Vittal asks how evolution of human being from pyramid is in line with our Shastras.
So yes, the Shastras do talk about the evolution of the human being. It is integral in some of our granthas where we talked about how the human being evolved, and it is a process of it is described in a slightly different way, where at each yoni or each birth that that person takes, he is progressing in an intellectual way towards, towards a current form, which is probably the most evolved state. So it definitely finds a reference. A lot of people try to draw comparison between the evolution of the human being and the Dashavatara, which I think is a very forced fit, if I may say, between the two, because yes, there are similarities, because from the Neanderthal man to the current day modern man, the picture pictorially it seems to be similar, but no, that's not the explanation of the human being. Because first of all, Dashavatara is not the evolution at all, but God is without vriddhi or harasa. That means neither does he grow nor does he decline. So whereas the evolution of the man is clearly an upward curve, which talks about his ability as he's growing in each of those stages. Yes.
Okay. So now looking at the time, I think we're done with all the questions. I think I'll just move on to uh, the next workshops.
Yeah,
The
maybe
next
we
upcoming,
can do that, and then we can take a few more questions and then we can close. So
yeah.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So regarding the next workshop, so we on 4th October 2020, which is Understanding Nature of God, and followed by the Brahma Sutra series, which will be a part one, part three. So I really request all the viewers to like sort of fix your calendars, because it's very important, because this part one, two, and three is very interesting. So this will get into the entire Brahma Sutras and try to sort of decode these. And the next workshops are about, does God control everything and what's my role? That's very interesting. The symbolism of Hinduism, the stories, gods, and mystic rituals, and why do Hindus have so many gods? And we'll also talk about theory of relativity, and so on and so forth. So I request all the viewers sort of be in touch with us, so that we'll discuss all these upcoming workshops. And request to all the participants. So please, if you have any topics or suggestions or any questions, Like you can directly write to us. Like if you want us to sort of improve this workshop, you can write into us, which is madhvacharya for youth at gmail.com. Also, we are on YouTube, Facebook. Also, please follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The next workshop, which is on October 2020, which is on nature of God. Sundar, you want to sort of
Yeah.
finally sum up
Absolutely.
between
So I would
science
like
and
to take
spirituality?
two questions quickly. One challenge for youngsters, Sripati says, every Madhva Mata, I think, follows different rules. Simple example, Ekadashi, it is followed differently in each Mata, even Krishna Janmashtami. So why are our gurus not questioning the logic? So I think, there it is like this. There is a philosophy and there is a certain set of practices of that philosophy, right? They have to go hand in hand, obviously. There's a philosophy that gets manifested in certain practices. Now, the practices might not be exactly similar, but the philosophy is the same, right? So let's look at two schools. Two schools both follow the same syllabus, but their uniforms may be different. What is taught, the manner it is taught in one school may be different from another school. So, yes, it will be wonderful for all of us to converge onto a common date, a common way of doing things. But my simple request to Mr. Sripati and Karthik and others who are putting this question, it's a very relevant question, and we should all strive towards convincing our matas to do this. But my humble request to all of you is let us not make that the central issue in which we are evaluating our philosophy. Mata is more important than Matha. I think Prabhanjanacharya has beautifully said it in one of the clippings which is being circulated, which was also a part of our workshop. So Matha is important. It brings with it its own set of practices. Practices are important, and because of several factors, these practices might vary from one place to the other. But what is more important than all of this put together is a philosophy behind our of which drive our matas, which is Madhva Mata, where there is absolutely no divergence whatsoever, even by 1% across all the matas. So yes, exactly, I would agree with you, but the topic of the practice is bound to have certain variations because of local geographies, different, slightly different systems. Both are acceptable. The Ekadashi variation happens because of two different systems of astronomy, both of which are accepted as Shastras. So they're coming to a different conclusion because different calendaring, mainly because of that. It is an important thing, but it's not the most critical thing that we have to be contemplating on. Akshay has asked a question: will the 117th workshop deal with the question of Datta Swatantriya? The answer is yes. I know this is a topic which is of lot of interest, and in fact, this is one of the things that got us very interested to start this workshop itself. More than 15 years back. So, in summary, thank you all of you. What I would like to conclude on the topic of science and spirituality is, in my mind, and in the mind of most people who sort of look at the topic of science and spirituality, they are not divergent on every topic. There are certain areas that are different, but essentially, both of them are taking us to the right spirit, to the same destination. I think we have to study both science and Shastras with an open mind, with a sense of inquiry, and enjoy the process. Each studying, just like the way we all enjoyed looking at, the orange color flames coming out of in a chemistry lab when we were in the chemistry lab. We enjoyed experiments in the physics lab. We enjoyed looking at a snake inside a jar in a biology lab, the delight of having solved a complex mathematics problem in class, all of that gave us absolute delight in our lives when we were studying science. So I would say that all of us should read Ananda Tirtha Shastras And the perfect guarantee at the end of Ananda Tirtha Shastra is we will all get Ananda. So whether you eat 1 kilo of sweet or 50 grams of sweet, the answer is the same, that you get that sweetness in your mouth. So I would urge everybody, can we have all of us should take up the study of Shastras. The COVID time is a great time for us to start, because hopefully all of us have slightly more time in our hands, and a lot of web resources which are available. Please do read them and ensure that you are studying the philosophies, Shastras. Um, so yeah, that is all I
Sundar,
would like to say. Yeah. Anything else you would like to bring up?
Sundar, Shruti asks, in India we have many philosophies. Amongst all of them, which one suits the current generation the most?
You should choose it yourself, Shruti. Unfortunately, we cannot simplify that. The easy answer to give is that it should be Madhya Shastra. But let's not come to that conclusion. I would like you to come to that conclusion after studying the Madhya Shastra, because when you study any text of Madhya Shastra, it starts with what were the other forms of philosophy that were there. So it discusses them in detail and then talks about the highlights of Madhya Shastra and why Madhya Shastra is the most scientific. So I would like, these are the conclusions I have come after 30 years of studies in different ways. I would like you to come to that conclusion after your own studies.
Thanks, Shruti, for that question. And thanks, Sundar, for your time and insight. And I hope all the viewers really enjoyed this session. So before I conclude, I once again thank all the viewers who have joined. A special thank you to all the MFI volunteers for creating this awesome session. And we'll meet you in the next session. Until then, live with confidence. Namaskaram.
Namaskar.